Good morning to all of you again. Good morning to those of you who are joining us by way of video. We wish you well today. And it is my prayer that not only for those here, but for those of you who join us, that the Lord will speak to you personally and deeply today. That His Word will enrich you throughout the coming week. We've been studying discipleship. What does it mean to be a disciple of Jesus? What does it mean to be a follower, a committed follower? What does it look like for us to not only claim certain beliefs, but to have our life reflect what we believe? What does it mean to truly be a disciple of Jesus? So I got to tell you that singing that song, "It Is Well With My Soul," and the contemporary version, the added chorus to it, "Through it all, my eyes are on you." I guess it's been, not this past week, the week before, maybe it was 2 weeks ago. I was awake very early in the morning, just burdens on my heart, not able to go back to sleep. And after lying in bed for a while, I thought, I'm just going to get up. So I just got up, went outside. It was around 4 o'clock in the morning. And I went out, just walked outside. I thought, it was supposed to be a little cooler. That was one of the first cooler mornings we've had since a year ago, it seems like. And I went outside, and there was a very gentle but cool breeze blowing. And my spirit lifted for a moment. And so I walked on out, down the stairs of the front steps, and out into the middle of the driveway, and I just looked up. Absolutely amazing. The moon was not out, so to speak, that morning. The sky was, it was dark from not having the reflection of the sun off the moon. But the brightness of the stars was stunning. It had been a while since I'd been up that time of the morning outside to where I could see them. And from where I was standing in the middle of the driveway, and if right now you're thinking, man, what do Reed's neighbors think of him? There's no telling. That's just one of the many instances where I'm sure they're thinking they're crazy ones out in the driveway again. But I was out there, and I was just overwhelmed. The stars, just from where I am, and there's the lights in Rock Hill, there's the lights in the neighborhood, there's a lot of things that were keeping me from seeing even what we can see just with our eyes. But the stars were they were all over the place. And it was as if they were speaking to me that morning. And it was just amazing. And I felt all at the same time very small and amazingly cared for. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but my mind went to the beginning words of Psalm 19, because I was experiencing it that morning. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of His hands. Day after day, they, the heavens, they, the stars in the sky, day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge. They have no speech. They use no words. No sound is heard from them. Yet their voice, goes out into all the earth. Their words to the ends of the world. I'm telling you, that's what I experienced that morning. In the silence, there was a hushed proclamation. There was a voice so substantial that it just froze me where I was, reminding me of the awesomeness of the God we worship. A reminder of how vast He is. A reminder of how little I am in the midst of all that is, and how little I know of this great one. For all of my study, for all of my pursuit, for all of the knowledge He has given me by revealing Himself to me, how little I know of Him. Who is it that created everything I could see, and I could only see a drop of what's out there? You know that. Unbelievable. How does He even know that I'm here, let alone care about me and what concerns me? Deeply humbled and deeply encouraged, deeply reminded that I do matter to Him, that He watches, that He listens, that He hears, and that He's with me, and He's with you every step of the way. We've been studying these steps of Jesus being with us, the steps along the way. We've been in the Gospel of Mark, and I invite you to turn there this morning. I don't know how many of you took me up on the homework assignment I gave you last week, those of you who were here. But we've been following along, not from the beginning, but we've been following Jesus' journey with His disciples in particular. In the early chapters, He had been focusing more on the crowds, and then as we began to get into chapter 8 of Mark's Gospel, we begin to see Jesus narrow the focus in on His disciples. And I encouraged you, although we spoke just of a short passage, 27 through 38, I encouraged you to back up and this week read from the Gospel of Mark 8, verse 22, all the way to the end of chapter 10. That's a huge passage to read, and it's a significant passage. And so let me say now, so I don't forget, that's this week's homework again. Read it again. 8:22, I don't care, go back to the beginning of Mark if you're adventurous. But start no less than 8:22 and read to the end of chapter 10. Stunning, amazing what God is doing and what He has to teach us just in those passages. If you were here, or if you watched on video, if you happen to remember, even if you watched, toward the end of the message, I challenged us with this question that Jesus asked His disciples. Jesus was trying to get them to see Him for who He is. He was trying to get them to understand His mission. But in order to understand His mission on earth, they had to know who He is, really, not just the obvious. And so He had taken them up to a village called Caesarea Philippi, and He had asked them, who do people say that I am? Which is a much easier question. And then He leveled that stunning question, but who do you say that I am? And I asked you the question, as if Jesus was asking you through my voice, who do you say that I am? Who am I to you? And I challenged you not just to think of answering the question hypothetically, but to imagine Jesus looking you in the eyes and asking you, who am I to you? Who do you say that I am? It's a challenging question. I've thought about it more this week and imagined that very event occurring in my life. Jesus standing here. And I'm assuming a lot of things. I'm assuming the fact that I could even be standing on my feet, looking at Him, being in His presence in human form, but in all of His awesome godliness. And looking Him in the eyes and Him saying, Reed, who am I to you? I think of the words of that song, I can only imagine, would I even be able to speak? Would I not be down on my knees? Would I be on my face? What in the world would I say? But Jesus, before He ascended, Jesus, when He was here on earth in the flesh, looked at those disciples and He asked them that question, who do you say that I am? And so my encouragement to you was to consider that this week and to read this passage, because what we find by backing up to the story right before this and reading to the end of chapter 10 is that Mark has told the different stories. He's assembled them in such a way to speak a very clear message to us. Among other things, he's challenging us to consider how well do we see. He's considering us, in fact, with an answer already in mind. We need God's healing touch so that we might see more clearly. Because we're all blind. Even with all that we have today that the original disciples didn't have. Not only do we have the word in print, we have their testimony after they were informed from all the bumbling and stumbling, and then the resurrection appearances and seeing him in his full glorified self just before he ascended to the Father. Their testimonies here. We have all of that, and yet we still struggle, don't we? We still struggle to understand, who is he? Who is this one who was God in the flesh among us? Who is this one who was the God of all creation that came and took on human form and was among us and walked with us and talked with us and ate with us back then, and yet is still today, now resurrected? Who am I? So I want to highlight two particular passages to you today. Jesus has been trying to help the disciples see. He's been challenging them. He's been trying to get them to understand, see me for who I really am, knowing they couldn't fully see, but to try to begin to realize the phenomenal event that occurred by God sending his Son and coming in the flesh to be with us. He's been challenged by the religious leaders. He's struggling with the crowds not to understand who he is, even though he's been working all these miracles. And in verse 22, Jesus and his disciples had come to Bethsaida. And some people, once again, finding out where Jesus is, aware of his healing powers, brought a blind man and begged Jesus to touch him. He took the blind man by the hand and led him outside the village. He was trying to get away. He didn't want all the crowds there. Jesus has a mission, and he knows that the more and more known he becomes, the more difficult it's going to be to fulfill this mission, because the opposition is going to arise. Because the powers that were and the powers that are threatened when he comes into their presence. So he led the man outside the village. When he had spit on the man's eyes and put his hands on him, I got to stop for a minute. I got to stop because maybe you're like me. This is not something we do today. What is up with this? I mean, what's the deal with the spit? So I studied it a little bit, and I'll tell you, I don't know fully what it is. But I understand that in that time, the traditions were, an understanding was that it had the spittle, one spittle had some therapeutic meaning. We use herbal supplements today. We use other things that we believe can be a part of our healing. Somehow in that day and age, they believed that one's spittle, like one's touch, could be involved in healing. So keep that in mind. This wasn't some weird, off-the-wall thing. They would not have been shocked. When he had spit on the man's eyes and put his hands on him, Jesus asked, "Do you see anything?" He looked up and said, "I see people. They look like trees walking around." You ever had that experience? Maybe not that exact experience, but when you realize that what you're seeing isn't exactly what you're looking at. Yesterday I was reminded that although I am deeply thankful for the glasses that you see on my face, they can only do so much. And just as a kid, when I wasn't much older than one of the ones with us, two of the ones that are in here with us today, when I was about 7 and I couldn't see, and my mom and dad took me to get glasses. You know, I brought them in here before, months ago, maybe you remember. And I put those glasses on for the first time. I was 7 years old. And the first thing out of my mouth was, "Mom, the trees have leaves and everything." Well, duh. I was old enough to know the trees had leaves, but you didn't see the leaf until you held it. You certainly didn't see it, from my perspective, when I'm driving in the car and I'm looking out I couldn't see that there were leaves on the tree. It was just green. And the focus became clear. All of a sudden, I could see what I knew, but I didn't know. I'll never forget that. Then yesterday, a little more humbling experience, just yesterday. Some of you were with me. We're changing some of the accounting we're doing, and we've got new software, and we were loading it on the computer, and you know, the guys who created it must have x-ray vision, because I'm telling you, the font, if you can measure a font, if there is such a thing as a font in like a -2, I'm pretty sure that's what it was. I mean, it was tiny. And I did what I'm learning to do more and more. You know, I'm looking under the glasses, I'm looking over the glasses, I'm right up at the... Man, that font was small, and it reminded me that even though I have lenses that help me see much better than I can see without, my vision is still flawed. I'm still struggling to see what's right in front of me. This is where the disciples were. Jesus was right in front of them. And yet they're struggling. I see him, but I don't know what I'm seeing. I see him, but not on all the details that he is. And sometimes I'm seeing him, and I'm looking, and I'm asking my friends, and I still don't know what I'm looking at. Just like when I stood out in the driveway and looked up in the sky and thought, I can't even see all of what you've created, let alone imagine who you are. After saying, I see people, they look like trees walking around, once more Jesus put his hands on the man's eyes, and then his eyes were opened. His sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. It's as if it was a two-part healing. It's as if Jesus put his hands on him the first time, and he gained his sight, but it was only partial. You ever had that feeling? And then Jesus touched him again, and he could see more clearly. Now, I don't want you to misunderstand. Nowhere in this passage, or even in the verses and chapters to come, do we get the idea that their healing sight was completely restored. They still struggle to figure out who Jesus is. But they could only begin to imagine him more as Jesus began to reveal himself more and more. Jesus has to do that for us. Jesus asks immediately after this his disciples. It's as though he tells that story to then say, who do you see me to be? Can you see me? Now who do you see? Can you see me now? And Peter gives the answer. You know, we talked about that last week. Peter says, you're the Messiah, or you're the Christ. And he gives the answer. But he has no idea what that really means. His idea of it is not, in fact, the biblical idea. And in the next series of stories, as you work your way through chapters, the rest of 8 and 9 and 10, Jesus is continually trying to teach them. He's giving them a variety of experiences. He takes 3 of them up on the mount for the transfiguration, when God does an amazing, miraculous revelation to let them see him for who he is. And then he heals another boy that had been possessed by a spirit, not the first of those stories. And then he predicts his death a second time, because he knows how slow we are to grasp who he is, because he is so radically different than what we expect. And it continues all the way to the end of chapter 10. And there's so much here, I'm telling you. That's why I'm encouraging you again this week. Read it again. Read it again, but I want you to read it with new eyesight. Read it again this week with this. In chapter 8, Jesus heals a man and never mentions the man's faith. He heals his eyesight and never mentions whether the man has faith or not. He touched him once, it wasn't enough, he touched him again. He's recognizing all that has to take place in our coming to understand who he is. And then by the end of chapter 10, we find blind Bartimaeus sitting on the road in Jericho, begging as he had done for some time. And when he heard that Jesus of Nazareth, I'm in verse 47, 10:47. When he heard that Jesus of Nazareth was coming, he began to shout, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." This blind guy sitting on the side of the road recognizes Jesus for who he is. Son of David. It was language that would have spoken to the people of the day. This is the promised one. This is the one who has been promised by all the prophets. And we've come through all these years and now he's here. This is the one who's going to sit on the throne that will have no end. This is the one who will lead the kingdom of God forever. This is the one we've been waiting on. And here's a blind man who sees Jesus. And in this story, after Jesus calls him, after Jesus asks him, "What do you want me to do for you?" And the blind man says, "Rabbi, I want to see." And Jesus says, "Go, your faith has healed you." This blind man saw Jesus coming and he knew who he was without seeing him like we see. He believed in his heart what he had heard. He believed what he'd been told. And he believed that Jesus not only was who he was, but he had the mission that he had, and he could do what he was called to do, and that is to bring healing to the lame, to bring sight to the blind, to free the captives. He believed that Jesus was the one who was God come in the flesh to help you and me deal with all of what we're dealing with, but not just to deal with what we're dealing with in life, but to understand who God is and who we are as his people and what he's called us to do with our lives. How radically we are changed. How our focus in life is to be radically altered. How our agenda in life is to be radically altered. How our seeing of what is going on around us, the realm in which we live, is very different than what we could see before he touches us. It's as if one of those sci-fi movies where you see the characters coming and going and it looks like the same world we live in, and yet you realize the world that they're encountering, we don't see at all. It's not just a sci-fi movie, it is in fact our reality, folks. We simultaneously, as true followers of Jesus, live in two realms now. We live in this physical realm, but we also live within the realm of the kingdom of God that is already coming. And it's not fully here, and we haven't seen Jesus for who he is fully. But he's already here, and he's already calling us to see with our spirit, to see with our mind's eye, to see with our hearts who he is and to follow his lead. And to do what he tells us to do, and to trust that he will do what only he can do. And that as we do it, we will see the kingdom coming. What in the world do you make of that? What would that look like if we lived that way? What is possible? Truthfully, if you're like I am, my imagination is struggling to catch up with that, let alone my eyesight. I'm trying to conceive in my mind, what would that look like? And it's of great importance because it's not a hypothetical. It's in fact a reality. We are living in the realm of the kingdom come, whether we realize it or not. Jesus is among us through the power and person of his Spirit, whether we know it or not. I mean, we know it because we have to invite him to come in, but whether we recognize what he's doing, he's here and at work. What a tragedy it would be to miss that. What a missed opportunity it would be. Mark has told these stories. The healing of the eyesight of one who only partially saw it first makes me think of us. Because even though I have the scripture and I read it regularly and I study it, man, the more I know, the more I realize how little I know. The more there is to discover. And not just knowing it, but living it out and experiencing it is a whole new level of education. And he has to do again, and then I get to see more. But I'm still struggling to grasp it. But what is of more value? What pays greater dividend than to get to know the one who is and was and always will be? Of what greater value to your life and my life today would there be if we got to know him more of who he is and lived out more of what he's calling us to live out? It's to study the Word like it matters life and death today. Like if I don't get it now, I'm going to miss the big opportunity. Miss the big chance. What does it mean? What could it mean for your faith and my faith and your life, like daily living and mine, if we really grasped that his kingdom has come and he's here to live through us, to work through us, to reveal himself through us? How many times I keep asking myself and you, imagine the possibilities. What would it look like? I read these stories and I relate to how much the disciples struggled. And I talk with you in the comings and goings, and I realize all that's in my life and your life. I realize all the distractions. I realize all the burdens we carry, the things we have to do, the things we aren't getting done, the needs that we have. How in the world do I have time to make study, to make this a significant part of my life, let alone the focus of my life? But friends, if we're ever going to experience the richness of what Jesus really has for us, this is the calling. And when you think about the end of the story for these disciples, the end of their life on earth, not only the radical change it had in them, but what it propelled them to do, we have no reason to think that it could be any less than that for us. Not just life-changing, but world-changing. Freedom for people who have been in bondage all their lives. I'm not talking about the worst-case scenario. I'm talking about our family members and friends that are just dealing with stuff and they don't know how to handle it. I'm talking about us with each other. What difference would it actually make if we just said, Jesus, I have no idea how I could do this on my own, but nor do I know how I could ever get to know you for who you are unless you help me, unless you heal my eyesight. I'm asking you to do this for me just like you did for Bartimaeus. Because if you did it for him, you'll do it for me. Bartimaeus believed Jesus. Do we? Do we believe he'll heal us? Do we believe he'll give us the eyesight? Do we believe he's capable and wants more than anything to change our whole way of existing? This is what's in front of us.